Alright, let's start with something simple. Gold. A metal that on paper does almost nothing. You can't eat it, you can't power your house with it, in a blackout it won't even keep the lights on. And yet, every single time people stop trusting money, they don't run to technology, they don't run to innovation, they run back to gold.
Which is strange, isn't it? Because gold hasn't really changed, but our trust in everything else clearly has.
That instinct, that almost primitive reflex is quietly waking up again right now. Not on social media, not in flashy headlines, not in retail trading apps, but deep inside central banks, inside governments, inside institutions that usually move last, not first. Something is shifting, and it's happening quietly.
Quietly, which usually means it matters more than we're being told.
Over the past year, China has been sending a very specific signal, not through speeches, not through policy documents, but through gold. Official announcements spoke of massive new gold discoveries, not one, but two. One in Hunan, in central China, another in Liaoning, in the northeast. Together, they were described as holding more than 2,000 metric tons of gold.
Pause on that number for a second. 2,000 tons. That's not a footnote, that's a headline all by itself.
That amount is nearly as large as all the gold China officially claims to already own. And if you zoom out even further, it represents a surprisingly large slice of total global central bank gold reserves. On paper, this sounds like geological history.
But in reality, it feels more like theater.
Because timing matters. These announcements didn't come during an economic boom. They didn't arrive when confidence was overflowing. They appeared right as pressure was building. The property sector had already cracked. Major developers were collapsing under debt. Exports were slowing. The currency was under strain, and market confidence was quietly slipping.
So naturally, an uncomfortable question started floating around. Is this really about gold in the ground, or is it about something else entirely?
Because gold isn't just a metal. Gold is a message. When governments talk about gold, they're not talking to miners, they're talking to markets, to investors, to creditors. They're talking about trust.
Announcing a massive gold discovery is basically saying, relax, we're backed. We still have something real.
It's the financial version of casually mentioning a very wealthy relative.
Right when the bank suddenly starts calling.
To be fair, no one is claiming these deposits don't exist. But in mining, discovery and extraction live in completely different worlds, years apart, billions of dollars apart, and filled with risk.
Which makes the urgency of the announcement feel a little curious.
At this stage, there is no fully independent verification confirming the scale being promoted, and yet there doesn't seem to be much concern about proving it quickly.
Almost as if the story itself matters more than the metal.
But even if every ounce turns out to be real, even if every estimate holds, it still doesn't explain what happens next, because while the world was busy debating geology, China was doing something far more tangible. It was reaching outward, beyond its own soil,
Toward gold that doesn't need announcements, gold that already exists.
And that's where this story quietly stops being about China alone.
And starts pulling another player into the frame.
China.
Russia.
Because when gold starts to matter again, it's never just about wealth.
It's about survival.
About control.
And about who gets to define trust.
When promises start to fail. If the gold stories at home were about signaling, about reassurance, about buying time, then what China was doing abroad was something else entirely. This part doesn't come with press releases, no grand announcements, no official ceremonies, just movement. Quiet, persistent, relentless.
Because when a country truly cares about gold, it doesn't talk about it. It goes and gets it.
And that trail leads far from Beijing, far from Hunan, far from Liaoning. It leads to Africa, a continent rich in gold, but poor in protection. Rich in resources, but vulnerable in governance. And in that environment, a very specific pattern began to appear.
Almost like a business model, just unofficial.
In places like Ghana, one of Africa's most gold-rich nations, local communities started noticing something strange. Foreign groups arriving quietly, often under the label of tourism, sometimes as small businesses. But what followed didn't look small at all.
Excavators, industrial washing equipment, chemical processing setups. Not exactly what you pack for a vacation.
These operations weren't artisanal mining. They weren't survival digging. They were industrial scale, organized, and incredibly destructive. Mercury, cyanide, chemicals banned in most regulated mining operations. Entire rivers turned toxic. farmland rendered useless, communities left with poisoned water and no recourse.
And somehow, these operations didn't look afraid.
Because they weren't. Reports began to surface of armed security, private guards, perimeters enforced not by local law, but by force. And this wasn't isolated.
Once you see the pattern, you start seeing it everywhere.
Congo, Zimbabwe, Cameroon, Sudan. Different countries, same blueprint. People, machines, money, protection. Gold flows out, silently, steadily.
And when questions come up, the answer is always the same.
Beijing denies involvement. Official statements frame it as isolated actions by private citizens, uncoordinated, unplanned.
Which sounds reasonable until you think about it for more than 10 seconds.
Because no spontaneous citizen operation moves heavy machinery across borders, imports banned chemicals, hires armed guards, and extracts hundreds of kilograms of gold without protection higher up the food chain.
This isn't chaos, it's logistics.
And while China's approach looks messy, even reckless, another player is running a very different operation: Russia.
Same objective, different method.
Russia doesn't need illegal miners. It doesn't need to hide behind tourism visas. Instead, it negotiates directly with governments, with military regimes, with leaders who desperately need stability.
Or at least something that looks like it.
In countries like Mali, Burkina Faso, Sudan, and the Central African Republic, Russia offers a simple deal: security, military support, political backing. In exchange, access.
Access to gold. A lot of it.
This is not mining, it's geopolitics. Gold traded not for money, but for influence. Not bought, but earned through leverage.
It's cleaner than illegal mining, and far more effective.
While China drains gold through shadow networks, Russia locks it in through state-level agreements. Two different styles, same destination.
Gold vaults filling up, quietly.
And this isn't happening because gold prices look attractive. It's happening because something deeper is breaking.
Because when trust in the system weakens, the race isn't for profit.
It's for insulation.
For assets that don't answer to sanctions or signatures or foreign courts.
And that brings us to the part of the story where gold stops being about the present.
Gold starts being about the past.
A past where money meant something very different.
To understand why gold suddenly matters this much, we have to rewind. Not a few years, not even a few decades. We have to go back to a time when money wasn't just numbers on a screen.
Back when money came with a promise, a very specific one.
In 1944, as much of Europe and Asia lay in ruins after World War II, the United States stood in a unique position. Its factories were intact, its economy was dominant, and most importantly, it held the largest gold reserves on Earth.
So it did what winners usually do. It wrote the rules.
At a conference at Bretton Woods, 44 countries agreed to a new financial order. The US dollar would sit at the center, fixed to gold, $35 for 1 ounce. All other currencies would not be tied to gold directly, but to the dollar.
In other words, trust the dollar and you don't need to worry about gold.
The message was simple, elegant, convincing. You don't need to hoard gold. You don't even need to hoard dollars, because every dollar, at least in theory, was backed by gold.
And the world accepted it, not because everyone trusted America unconditionally.
But because there was no real alternative.
That part tends to get forgotten.
For a while, the system worked. Global trade expanded, currencies stabilized, confidence grew. But promises, especially financial ones, only matter as long as they can be kept.
And in the early 1970s, the math stopped working.
The US was spending heavily. Wars, social programs, economic expansion. More dollars were flowing out than gold flowing in.
And eventually, someone was going to ask for the gold.
In 1971, the promise was quietly broken. The dollar was no longer convertible into gold.
Just like that. No gold, no apology.
The system didn't collapse. Instead, it evolved. The dollar was no longer backed by metal, but by power, economic power, military power, political influence.
And one very clever deal.
Oil. The US reached an agreement with key oil producers, most importantly, Saudi Arabia. Oil would be sold in dollars, only dollars.
If you wanted energy, you needed dollars.
And if you needed dollars, you needed access to the US-led financial system. Thus, the petrodollar was born.
The dollar went from backed by gold to required by necessity.
And for decades, that was enough. The world ran on promises, on trust, on the belief that the system, while imperfect, was stable.
Until trust started cracking again.
Today, China is studying this history very carefully, not nostalgically, strategically.
Because from Beijing's perspective, Bretton Woods wasn't a miracle.
It was a blueprint.
A reminder that financial dominance isn't magic.
It's constructed, piece by piece, agreement by agreement, story by story.
And every story needs a foundation: gold.
Because gold doesn't require belief. It doesn't need courts. It doesn't rely on sanctions not being applied.
Gold just sits there, patient, heavy, unimpressed.
When China talks about gold today, it's not looking backward. It's testing whether the world is ready to believe a different story.
A story where trust is no longer borrowed, but rebuilt.
And that brings us to the other side of this equation.
Because for Russia, gold isn't about ambition.
It's about survival.
For Russia, gold is not a symbol. It's not about status, and it's not about reshaping the world overnight. It's about survival, inside a system that has already shown it can turn hostile.
In 2022, that lesson stopped being theoretical.
More than $300 billion of Russia's foreign reserves were frozen, not destroyed, not stolen, just locked, with a signature on paper.
And in that moment, every country paying attention understood the message.
Any asset held inside the Western financial system, no matter how safe it looks, is ultimately a promise.
And promises can be revoked.
That single act shattered an illusion that reserves were neutral, that money was untouchable, that the rules were permanent.
Suddenly, gold didn't feel old-fashioned anymore.
Because gold doesn't live in databases. It doesn't wait for approvals. It doesn't respond to sanctions. If you hold it, you control it.
That's a different kind of power.
So Russia doubled down, quietly, methodically. More gold, more physical assets, less reliance on anyone else's promises.
Not to dominate, but to endure.
Step back, and the pattern becomes clear. China accumulates gold to rebuild trust. Russia accumulates gold to protect itself.
Different motivations, same conclusion.
Trust is no longer automatic. Not in currencies, not in institutions, not even in alliances that once felt unbreakable.
Trust now comes with conditions.
And when trust becomes conditional, systems don't collapse immediately. They adapt, slowly, quietly, then all at once.
This doesn't mean the dollar disappears tomorrow, or that gold replaces everything next year.
History rarely moves that fast.
But it always moves.
What we're witnessing is not the end of the current system, but the preparation for whatever comes after.
A world where money has to prove itself again.
Where trust needs backing, not speeches, not promises, but something tangible.
Something that doesn't flinch.
Gold is not the future. It never was.
It's the insurance people reach for when the future starts feeling uncertain.
And when nations, not just individuals, start buying that insurance at the same time,
That's not coincidence.
that's a signal.
A quiet one, but a powerful one.
And here's the real question.
Are we watching history repeat itself?
Or are we watching the first draft of an entirely new system?
If this conversation made you pause, if it made you rethink what money really is,
Then stay with us,
subscribe, follow, and keep watching.
because the biggest changes in finance,
Never announce themselves,
they move quietly.
right before everything changes.